Ben Affleck did not sit down with GQ to attack Jennifer Lopez. He sat down in the spring of 2025 to do something far less dramatic and far more revealing. He tried to explain, in his own words, why a marriage that began with so much hope ended so quietly. There was no scandal to confess, no secret to unearth, no villain to name. What he offered instead was something rarer in celebrity culture, a plain, almost uncomfortable honesty about how two people can love each other and still be wrong for each other's lives. This is the story of how that honesty came out, piece by piece, over more than a year, and what it actually tells us about the collapse of one of Hollywood's most watched relationships. To understand why the ending of this marriage generated so much commentary, it helps to remember how strange and long the road to it actually was. Affleck and Lopez first met on the set of the film Geely in 2002, and their romance became one of the most heavily covered celebrity relationships of that decade. They got engaged that same year and were originally set to marry in September 2003, before postponing the wedding just days beforehand, citing the intensity of media attention. They broke up entirely in January 2004. In the 2 decades that followed, both of them built separate lives. Affleck married actress Jennifer Garner in 2005, and the couple had 3 children, Violet, Serafina, and Samuel, before divorcing in 2018. Lopez, meanwhile, married singer Marc Anthony in 2004, had twins Emmy and Max with him, divorced in 2014, and was later engaged to former baseball star Alex Rodriguez before that relationship also ended. Their reconnection in the spring of 2021 became one of the more unlikely and widely followed stories in celebrity culture, largely because it seemed to close a loop that had been open for almost 2 decades. They married in a small, spontaneous ceremony in Las Vegas on July 16, 2022, then held a larger, more traditional wedding a month later, on August 20th, at Affleck's estate in Riceboro, Georgia, in front of family and friends. Lopez wrote about the day at the time in a newsletter to fans, describing it as a celebration of the idea that all you need is love. That framing, the idea of a second-chance love story, tested by time and finally realized, became the backbone of Lopez's own creative output over the following 2 years, including a new album, a companion film, and a behind-the-scenes documentary that placed their relationship at the center of her artistic narrative. It's against that backdrop, a courtship replayed twice, 2 decades apart, and turned into public art the second time around, that the divorce filing 2 years later carried so much weight. For months after Jennifer Lopez filed for divorce, the public built its own theory of what went wrong. Tabloids reached for the usual suspects: a fight, a betrayal, a secret third party, some single event that could explain everything. When Affleck's cover story ran in GQ on March 25, 2025, he didn't hand reporters any of that. Instead, he pointed back to a line he had used months earlier in Lopez's own documentary, The Greatest Love Story Never Told, and asked the writer to understand it in context rather than as a soundbite. The line itself had already gone viral on its own. You don't marry a ship captain and then complain that you don't like being out on the water. Affleck told GQ that the point of the metaphor wasn't regret, it was accountability. You've got to own what you knew going into any relationship, he said, according to the outlet's published transcript. He was careful, in the same conversation, to push back on the idea that this comment explained the whole marriage. He said directly that it wasn't the cause of some major fracture, and that watching the documentary wouldn't actually tell anyone what really happened between them. That distinction matters, because it's easy to flatten a complicated split into a single clever quote. What Affleck was actually describing was a mismatch of temperament, not a betrayal. He told GQ that he has a lot of respect for Lopez, and in a follow-up conversation days later, he stressed that he wanted his actual feelings and intentions and beliefs to come through clearly, not just the parts that were easy to turn into a headline. He also downplayed the idea that there was any single dramatic cause at all, telling the magazine that people have a tendency to look at breakups and want to identify root causes, when the truth, in his words, is much more quotidian than probably people would believe. The most direct thing he said publicly about the split itself was simple. There's no scandal, no soap opera, no intrigue. Whatever pulled the marriage apart, according to Affleck's own account, wasn't a single incident. It was something slower and less cinematic, two people with very different comfort levels around fame, discovering that comfort level matters more day to day than it seems like it should when you're falling in love. Affleck went a step further in describing why he agreed to participate in Lopez's documentary at all, even knowing it would put his private life on display. He told GQ that if he was going to take part, he wanted to do it in an honest way and in a way that's interesting, and that he found the project a genuinely worthwhile examination of two very different relationships to fame. There are a lot of people who I think have handled celebrity more adeptly and more adroitly than I have, Bennifer among them, he said. My temperament is to be a little bit more reserved and private than hers. That comment, more than the ship captain line itself, gets closest to naming the actual friction. Not a disagreement about a single event, but a permanent difference in how much public visibility each of them could comfortably live inside. Elsewhere in the same conversation, he offered a line that reframed the whole story in a gentler light. Describing the reality behind the tabloid narrative, he told GQ, "The truth is much more ordinary than people probably believe," and added that, to him, that ordinariness was what makes it kind of beautiful. While Affleck's words came through a magazine interview, Jennifer Lopez's most telling statement arrived in a very different form, a court filing. On August 20th, 2024, Lopez filed for divorce in Los Angeles County Superior Court. She did it herself, without a lawyer, and the timing was hard to read as coincidence. August 20th was the exact 2-year anniversary of the couple's formal wedding ceremony at Affleck's estate in Georgia, the large, traditional celebration that followed their smaller, spontaneous wedding in Las Vegas a month earlier, in July 2022. The paperwork itself told an even more layered story. Lopez listed their date of separation as April 26, 2024, nearly 4 months before she actually filed. That gap lines up with a period the public was already watching closely. Lopez attended the 2024 Met Gala alone that spring, and representatives for Affleck confirmed at the time that he was in Los Angeles filming The Accountant 2, rather than accompanying her. In the months that followed, the couple was seen together only sporadically. Their Beverly Hills home went up for sale, and by midsummer it was widely reported that they were living apart. When August 20th arrived, neither of them publicly acknowledged the date, and then, that same day, the filing became public. The documents also revealed there was no prenuptial agreement in place. That detail matters more than it might first appear. Marrying without a prenup, at that stage of both of their careers, meant that whatever either of them earned during the marriage, from film projects to endorsement and business deals, was treated as shared property under California law. It's a detail that suggests, more than any quote could, how fully both of them had committed to the relationship when it began. People magazine later reported, citing a source close to Lopez, that she had tried really hard to make things work and was heartbroken by how things ended. Though, as with any account attributed to an anonymous source, that characterization reflects the outlets reporting rather than Lopez's own public words. Whatever the emotional reality behind the filing, the choice of date did the talking. A divorce petition is, functionally, paperwork. But filing it on the exact anniversary of the wedding it was ending turned an administrative act into a statement, whether intentional or not. It made August 20th mean something very different in 2020 than it had in 2022. The filing itself was notably plain. Court records showed Lopez cited irreconcilable differences as the legal grounds for the split, the standard, no-fault language used in the vast majority of California divorces, and not, on its own, an admission of any specific wrongdoing by either party. She also asked the court that neither she nor Affleck be awarded spousal support, a request that further limited how much the filing itself could be read for drama. TMZ, which first reported the filing, noted that Lopez had gone through the process without an attorney of record, filing the paperwork herself. In the days that followed, the two were photographed together at least once, arriving at the Beverly Hills Hotel with their children in mid-September, a detail that outside reporting suggested was less a reconciliation than two co-parents continuing to navigate shared family obligations even as the legal process moved forward. It's worth noting, too, what the filing didn't include. There was no public statement from either Affleck or Lopez accompanying the filing, no joint announcement. and neither of their representatives responded to initial media requests for comment. For a couple whose reunion had been narrated publicly, in real time, through an album, a film, and a documentary, the divorce itself arrived almost entirely through paperwork, a contrast that a number of outlets pointed out at the time as its own kind of statement. Nearly 2 months before Affleck's GQ interview ran, Bennifer Lopez had already given her own account of the fallout, and it was far more raw than anything he would say. On October 9, 2024, Interview magazine published a conversation between Lopez and comedian Nikki Glazer, part of the publication's anniversary issue. The interview wasn't framed as a divorce post-mortem. It was a wide-ranging conversation about Lopez's career, her upcoming film Unstoppable, and her sense of self. But when the conversation turned to the previous several months, Lopez didn't dodge it. She told Glazer that after the release of her album and documentary, both of which put her relationship with Affleck at the center, she initially felt like she had reached a good place in her life. Then, in her words, it was like my whole FING world exploded. She didn't name Affleck directly anywhere in the interview, but the timeline left little ambiguity about what she meant. The summer of 2024 had brought the cancellation of her planned concert tour, the quiet unraveling of her marriage, and a wave of public scrutiny that she described as probably the hardest time of my life. Lopez also used an image that stuck with readers. She described the period as feeling like your whole house blows up and said that once the initial shock passed, she found herself sorting through the wreckage, asking herself what her own role had been in what happened. She told Glazer she wasn't looking for a new relationship, saying plainly, "I'm not looking for anybody," and described a kind of hard-won self-sufficiency, the realization, after decades of relationships, that she didn't need to be partnered to feel complete. It only took 30 years, she said, with some humor about how long that lesson had taken to land. What's notable, looking at the two accounts side by side, is the difference in register. Affleck's GQ interview, coming 5 months later, was measured and retrospective, a man explaining a decision he'd already processed. Lopez's Interview magazine conversation captured something closer to the middle of the storm, unfiltered, still working through it in real time, canceling a tour and stepping back from public life while she did. They weren't describing two different events. They were describing the same collapse from two very different vantage points, at two very different emotional distances from it. If the GQ interview was Affleck's most reflective moment on the subject, his comments a few weeks later were his warmest. On April 16, 2025, Affleck arrived at the Los Angeles premiere of The Accountant 2 with an unusual guest list. His 3 children with ex-wife Jennifer Garner, Violet, Serafina, and Samuel, alongside Lopez's twins Emmy and Max, whom she shares with her ex-husband Mark Anthony. Speaking to Entertainment Tonight on the carpet, Affleck didn't dodge questions about his ex-wife. If anything, he leaned into them. "Bennifer Lopez is spectacular, great to my kids, great ongoing relationship with them," he told the outlet. He went further, calling her an enormously important, tremendous person of a lot of integrity, whom he said he adores and is grateful to. He talked about the joy of having all 5 children together at the premiere, saying that kind of blended family moment is the joy of my life. When asked about the online narratives that had followed the divorce, he said simply that he doesn't pay much attention to them, adding that people often seem to look for something negative to say when there isn't one. It's worth being precise about what that moment does and doesn't tell us. It isn't evidence that the marriage could have worked, and it isn't a walk back of anything he said in GQ about their differing relationships with fame. What it shows is something more specific, that the end of a marriage didn't mean the end of a family structure both of them had built with 5 children between them. Lopez has, by outside reporting, stayed in contact with Affleck's kids as well. People previously reported, citing a source, that she keeps in touch with the Affleck kids and wants them to know they can reach out to her. Whether or not every detail of that reporting is verifiable, the visible fact of the premiere, 5 teenagers, 2 exes, 1 red carpet, speaks for itself in a way quotes can't. Strip away the speculation, and the documented timeline of the Affleck-Lopez divorce is fairly simple. They reconnected in 2021, nearly 2 decades after their first engagement fell apart in the early 2000s. They married in Las Vegas in July 2022, then held a larger ceremony in Georgia the following month. Cracks became visible to the public by the spring of 2024, Lopez attending the Met Gala without him. Reports of the couple living separately. Their home going up for sale. She filed for divorce on August 20th, 2024, on the anniversary of their Georgia wedding, listing a separation date of that April. The divorce was finalized in January 2025. 2 months later, Affleck gave his most extensive public comments on the split to GQ. A few weeks after that, both of their public actions, his red carpet comments, the presence of all 5 children together, suggested a working, cordial co-parenting relationship had replaced the marriage. None of that requires inventing motives or imagining private conversations no one witnessed. The public record, built from a court filing, 2 magazine interviews, and a handful of red carpet comments, is detailed enough on its own. What it shows isn't a war between 2 celebrities. It's something more ordinary and in its way more instructive. 2 people who loved each other enough to try again after 20 years, who ran into a genuine and specific incompatibility, one built for a private life, one built for a very public one, and who, by their own accounts, chose to handle the ending without turning their children into collateral damage. Affleck's own words framed it best, even if he wasn't trying to write a headline when he said them. There's no scandal here, no soap opera, no intrigue, just 2 people learning, in front of an audience that never stopped watching, that knowing what you're signing up for and being able to live inside it long-term are 2 very different things. There's also something worth noting about the order in which all of this became public. Lopez was the one who spoke first and spoke rawest, describing the immediate aftermath in October 2024 while she was still very much inside it, canceling a tour, stepping back from the spotlight, telling a friend and fellow performer in print that her world had exploded. Affleck didn't offer his own extended public reflection until 5 months later, by which point the divorce was already finalized and some of the rawest edges had had time to soften. That gap doesn't mean one of them processed the split more successfully than the other. It simply reflects 2 different public personas built over 2 very different careers. Lopez has spent 3 decades being asked to narrate her private life for an audience, through music, film, and interviews. And the interview magazine conversation fits a pattern she's followed since long before she met Affleck the second time. Affleck, by his own repeated description, is far more private by instinct, and the GQ interview reads like a rare exception to that instinct rather than a habit. What both accounts share, despite their different tones and different timing, is an absence of blame. Neither of them, in anything either has said on the record, has described the other as the cause of the breakup. Lopez never named Affleck directly in her interview magazine conversation. Affleck went out of his way more than once to say he respects her and that nothing about the split changes that. If there's a lesson in the public record here, it isn't really about celebrity excess or a doomed reunion. It's a more universal one about the limits of good intentions. 2 people can genuinely want the same thing, work hard at it, and still discover that the daily texture of their lives simply doesn't fit together the way the story around them suggested it should. So the record, when you lay it all out in order, tells a fairly coherent story. A rekindled love affair built and narrated in public for 2 years that ran into a specific and describable incompatibility, then ended through a court filing and 2 candid interviews rather than a scandal. What comes through in each account, the metaphor about ships and water, the filing on the wedding anniversary, the description of a world exploding, the praise on the red carpet,